Chapter 12 Select Incident of Lawful Trade. In Ramah there was a voice heard, weeping, and lamentation, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted. Jur 31:15. Mr. Haley and Tom jogged onward in their wagon, each, for a time, absorbed in his own reflections. Now, the reflections of two men sitting side by side are a curious thing, seated on the same seat, having the same eyes, ears, hands, and organs of all sorts, and having passed before their eyes the same objects. It is wonderful what a variety we shall find in these same reflections. As, for example, Mr. Haley, he thought first of Tom's length and breadth and height, and what he would sell for if he was kept fat and in good case till he got him into market. He thought of how he should make out his gang. He thought of the respective market value of certain supposititious men and women and children who were to compose it, and other kindred topics of the business. Then he thought of himself, and how humane he was that while other men chained their niggers hand and foot both, he only put fetters on the feet and left Tom the use of his hands, as long as he behaved well, and he sighed to think how ungrateful human nature was, so that there was evening room to doubt whether Tom appreciated his mercies. He had been taken in so by niggers whom he had favored, but still he was astonished to consider how good-natured he yet remained. As to Tom, he was thinking over some words of an unfashionable old book, which kept running through his head again and again, as follows: We have here no continuing city, but we seek one to come. Therefore God himself is not ashamed to be called our God, for he has prepared for us a city. These words of an ancient volume, got up principally by ignorant and unlearned men, have, through all time, kept up, somehow, a strange sort of power over the minds of poor, simple fellows like Tom. They stir up the soul from its depths and rouse, as with trumpet call, courage, energy, and enthusiasm, where before was only the blackness of despair. Mr. Haley pulled out of his pocket sundry newspapers and began looking over their advertisements with absorbed interest. He was not a remarkably fluent reader, and was in the habit of reading in a sort of recitative half aloud, by way of calling in his ears to verify the deductions of his eyes. In this tone he slowly recited the following paragraph: Executor's sale, Negroes, agreeably to order of court, will be sold on Tuesday, February 20, before the courthouse door in the town of Washington, Kentucky. The following Negroes: Hagar, aged 60, John, aged 30, Ben, aged 21, Saul, aged 25, Albert, aged 14, sold for the benefit of the creditors and heirs of the estate of Jesse Blutchard, Samuel Morris, Thomas Flint, executors. This year I must look at, said he to Tom, for want of somebody else to talk to. Ye see, I'm going to get up a prime gang to take down with ye, Tom. It'll make it sociable and pleasant like, good company will, ye know. We must drive right to Washington first and foremost, and then I'll clap you into jail while I does the business. Tom received this agreeable intelligence quite meekly, simply wondering, in his own heart, how many of these doomed men had wives and children, and whether they would feel as he did about leaving them. It is to be confessed, too, that the naive, offhand information that he was to be thrown into jail by no means produced an agreeable impression on a poor fellow who had always prided himself on a strictly honest and upright course of life. Yes, Tom, we must confess it, was rather proud of his honesty, poor fellow, not having very much else to be proud of. If he had belonged to some of the higher walks of society, he, perhaps, would never have been reduced to such straits. However, the day wore on, and the evening saw Haley and Tom comfortably accommodated in Washington, the one in a tavern and the other in a jail. About 11 o'clock the next day, a mixed throng was gathered around the courthouse steps, smoking, chewing, spitting, swearing, and conversing according to their respective tastes and turns, waiting for the auction to commence. The men and women to be sold sat in a group apart, talking in a low tone to each other. The woman who had been advertised by the name of Hagar was a regular African in feature and figure. She may have been 60, but was older than that by hard work and disease, was partially blind and somewhat crippled with rheumatism. By her side stood her only remaining son, Albert, a bright-looking little fellow of 14 years. The boy was the only survivor of a large family who had been successively sold away from her to a southern market. The mother held onto him with both her shaking hands, and eyed with intense trepidation every one who walked up to examine him. "Don't be feared, Aunt Hagar," said the oldest of the men. "I spoke to Masser Thomas about it, and he thought he may manage to sell you in a lot both together. Dey needn't call me worn out yet," said she, lifting her shaking hands. "I can cook yet, and scrub, and scour. I'm wuth a buying, if I do come cheap. Tell 'em dat are, you tell 'em," she added, earnestly. Haley here forced his way into the group, walked up to the old man, pulled his mouth open and looked in, felt of his Tess, made him stand and straighten himself, bend his back, and perform various evolutions to show his muscles, and then passed on to the next and put him through the same trial. Walking up last to the boy, he felt of his arms, straightened his hands, and looked at his fingers, and made him jump to show his agility. "He ain't gwine to be sold widout me," said the old woman with passionate eagerness. "He and I goes in a lot together. I rail strong, yet, masser, and can do heaps o' work, heaps on it, masser." "On plantation?" said Haley, with a contemptuous glance. "Likely story." And, as if satisfied with his examination, he walked out and looked, and stood with his hands in his pocket, his cigar in his mouth, and his hat cocked on one side, ready for action. "What think of 'em?" said a man who had been following Haley's examination, as if to make up his own mind from it. "Well," said Haley, spitting, "I shall put in, I think, for the youngerly ones and the boy." "They want to sell the boy and the old woman together," said the man. "Find it a tight pull. Why, she's an old rack o' bones, not worth her salt." "You wouldn't then?" said the man. "Anybody be a fool t would. She's half blind, crooked with rheumatiz, and foolish to boot. Some buys up these yer old critters, and says there's a sight more wear in 'em than a body d think," said the man, reflectively. "No go, t all," said Haley. "Wouldn't take her for a present fact. I've seen, now. Wal, t is kinder pity, now, not to buy her with her son. Her heart seems so sot on him. S'pose they fling her in cheap. Them that's got money to spend that our way, it's all well enough. I shall bid off on that our boy for a plantation hand. Wouldn't be bothered with her. No way, not if they'd give her to me," said Haley. "She'll take on despt," said the man. "Natly, she will," said the trader, coolly. The conversation was here interrupted by a busy hum in the audience, and the auctioneer, a short, bustling, important fellow, elbowed his way into the crowd. The old woman drew in her breath and caught instinctively at her son. "Keep close to your mammy, Albert, close. Dey'll put us up toger," she said. "Oh, mammy, I'm feared they won't," said the boy. "Dey must, child. I can't live, no ways, if they don't," said the old creature, vehemently. The stentorian tones of the auctioneer, calling out to clear the way, now announced that the sale was about to commence. A place was cleared and the bidding began. The different men on the list were soon knocked off at prices which showed a pretty brisk demand in the market. Two of them fell to Haley. "Come, now, young un," said the auctioneer, giving the boy a touch with his hammer. "Be up and show your springs. Now, put us two up toger, do please, masser," said the old woman, holding fast to her boy. "Be off," said the man, gruffly, pushing her hands away. "You come last. Now, darky, spring, and with the word he pushed the boy toward the block, while a deep, heavy groan rose behind him. The boy paused and looked back, but there was no time to stay, and dashing the tears from his large, bright eyes, he was up in a moment. His fine figure, alert limbs, and bright face raised an instant competition, and half a dozen bids simultaneously met the ear of the auctioneer. Anxious, half frightened, he looked from side to side as he heard the clatter of contending bids, now here, now there, till the hammer fell. Haley had got him. He was pushed from the block toward his new master, but stopped one moment and looked back when his poor old mother, trembling in every limb, held out her shaking hands toward him. "Buy me too, masser, for the dear Lord's sake. Buy me. I shall die if you don't. You'll die if I do. That's the kink of it," said Haley. "No." And he turned on his heel. The bidding for the poor old creature was summary. The man who had addressed Haley, and who seemed not destitute of compassion, bought her for a trifle, and the spectators began to disperse. The poor victims of the sale, who had been brought up in one place together for years, gathered round the despairing old mother, whose agony was pitiful to see. "Couldn't dey leave me one? Masser allers said I should have won." "He did," she repeated over and over in heartbroken tones. "Trust in the Lord, Aunt Hagar," said the oldest of the men sorrowfully. "What good will it do?" said she, sobbing passionately. "Mother, mother, don't, said the boy. "They say you got a good master. I don't care, I don't care. Oh, Albert, oh, my boy, you my last baby. Lord, how can I? Come, take her off. Can't some of ye?" said Haley, dryly. "Don't do no good for her to go on that our way." The old men of the company, partly by persuasion and partly by force, loosed the poor creature's last despairing hold, and, as they led her off to her new master's wagon, strove to comfort her. "Now," said Haley, pushing his 3 purchases together and producing a bundle of handcuffs, which he proceeded to put on their wrists, and, fastening each handcuff to a long chain, he drove them before him to the jail. A few days saw Haley, with his possessions, safely deposited on one of the Ohio boats. It was the commencement of his gang, to be augmented, as the boat moved on, by various other merchandise of the same kind, which he or his agent had stored for him in various points along shore. The La Belle Riviere, as brave and beautiful a boat as ever walked the waters of her namesake river, was floating gaily down the stream, under a brilliant sky, the stripes and stars of free America waving and fluttering overhead. The guards crowded with well-dressed ladies and gentlemen walking and enjoying the delightful day. All was full of life, buoyant and rejoicing, all but Haley's gang, who were stored with other freight on the lower deck, and who, somehow, did not seem to appreciate their various privileges as they sat in a knot, talking to each other in low tones. "Boys," said Haley, coming up briskly, "I hope you keep up good heart and are cheerful. Now, no sulks, ye see. Keep stiff upper lip, boys. Do well by me, and I'll do well by you." The boys addressed responded the invariable, "Yes, masser," for ages, the watchword of poor Africa. But it's to be owned they did not look particularly cheerful. They had their various little prejudices in favor of wives, mothers, sisters, and children seen for the last time, and, though they that wasted them required of them mirth, it was not instantly forthcoming. "I've got a wife," spoke out the article enumerated as John, aged 30, and he laid his chained hand on Tom's knee, "and she don't know a word about this, poor girl." "Where does she live?" said Tom. "In a tavern a piece down here," said John. "I wish, now, I could see her once more in this world," he added. Poor John! It was rather natural, and the tears that fell as he spoke came as naturally as if he had been a white man. Tom drew a long breath from a sore heart, and tried, in his poor way, to comfort him. And overhead in the cabin sat fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, and Mary, dancing children moved round among them, like so many little butterflies, and everything was going on quite easy and comfortable. "Oh, mamma," said a boy who had just come up from below, "there's a Negro trader on board, and he's brought 4 or 5 slaves down there." "Poor creatures," said the mother, in a tone between grief and indignation. "What's that?" said another lady. "Some poor slaves below," said the mother. "And they've got chains on," said the boy. "What a shame to our country that such sights are to be seen," said another lady. "Oh, there's a great deal to be said on both sides of the subject," said a gentlewoman who sat at her stateroom door sewing, while her little girl and boy were playing round her. "I've been South, and I must say I think the Negroes are better off than they would be to be free. In some respects, some of them are well off, I grant," said the lady to whose remark she had answered. "The most dreadful part of slavery, to my mind, is its outrages on the feelings and affections, the separating of families, for example." "That is a bad thing, certainly," said the other lady, holding up a baby's dress she had just completed and looking intently on its trimmings. "But then, I fancy, it don't occur often." "Oh, it does," said the first lady, eagerly. "I've lived many years in Kentucky and Virginia both, and I've seen enough to make any one's heart sick. Suppose, ma'am, your 2 children there should be taken from you and sold." "We can't reason from our feelings to those of this class of persons," said the other lady, sorting out some worsteds on her lap. "Truly, ma'am, you can know nothing of them, if you say so," answered the first lady, warmly. "I was born and brought up among them. I know they do feel just as keenly, evening more so, perhaps, as we do." The lady said, "Truly," yawned and looked out the cabin window, and finally repeated, for finale, the remark with which she had begun. "After all, I think they are better off than they would be to be free." "It's undoubtedly the intention of Providence that the African race should be servants, kept in a low condition," said a grave-looking gentleman in black, a clergyman, seated by the cabin door. "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be, the scripture says." Gen 9:25. This is what Noah says when he wakes out of drunkenness and realizes that his youngest son, Ham, father of Canaan, has seen him naked. "I say, stranger, is that what that text means?" said a tall man standing by. "Undoubtedly, it pleased Providence, for some inscrutable reason, to doom the race to bondage ages ago, and we must not set up our opinion against that." "Well, then, we'll all go ahead and buy up niggers," said the man, "if that's the way of Providence, won't we, squire?" said he, turning to Haley, who had been standing, with his hands in his pockets, by the stove and intently listening to the conversation. "Yes," continued the tall man, "we must all be resigned to the decrees of Providence. Niggers must be sold and trucked round and kept under. It's what they's made for. Pears like this your view as quite refreshing, an't it, stranger?" said he to Haley. "I never thought on tea," said Haley. "I couldn't have said as much myself. I han't no larning. I took up the trade just to make a living. If 'tan't right, I calculated to pent on tea in time, know. And now you'll save yourself the trouble, won't ye?" said the tall man. "See what tea is now, to know scripture. If ye'd only studied your Bible, like this your good man, ye may have knowed it before, and saved ye a heap o' trouble. Ye could just have said, 'Cust be, what's his name?' and tea would all have come right." And the stranger, who was no other than the honest drover whom we introduced to our readers in the Kentucky Tavern, sat down and began smoking, with a curious smile on his long, dry face. A tall, slender young man, with a face expressive of great feeling and intelligence, here broke in and repeated the words, "All things, whatever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye evening so unto them." "I suppose," he added, That is scripture, as much as cursed be. Canon. Well, it seems quite as plain a text, stranger, said John the drover, to poor fellows like us, now, and John smoked on like a volcano. The young man paused, looked as if he was going to say more, when suddenly the boat stopped, and the company made the usual steamboat rush to see where they were landing. Both them are chaps, parsons? Said John to one of the men as they were going out. The man nodded. As the boat stopped, a black woman came running wildly up the plank, darted into the crowd, flew up to where the slave gang sat, and threw her arms round that unfortunate piece of merchandise before. Enumerate, John, aged 30, and with sobs and tears bemoaned him as her husband. But what needs tell the story, told too often, every day told, of heartstrings rent and broken, the weak broken and torn for the profit and convenience of the strong. It needs not to be told, every day is telling it, too, in the ear of one who is not deaf, though he be long silent. The young man who had spoken for the cause of humanity and God before stood with folded arms, looking on this scene. He turned, and Haley was standing at his side. My friend, he said, speaking with thick utterance, how dare you, carry on a trade like this? Look at those poor creatures. Here I am, rejoicing in my heart that I am going home to my wife and child, and the same bell which is a signal to carry me onward towards them will part this poor man and his wife forever. Depend upon it, God will bring you into judgment for this. The trader turned away in silence. I say, now, said the drover, touching his elbow, there's differences in parsons, and there, cussed be canon don't seem to go down with this un, does it? Haley gave an uneasy growl. And that are an't the worst on tea, said John. Mabbe it won't go down with the Lord, neither, when ye come to settle with him one o' these days, as all on us must, I reckon. Haley walked reflectively to the other end of the boat. If I make pretty handsomely on one or two next gangs, he thought, I reckon I'll stop off this year. It's really getting dangerous. And he took out his pocketbook and began adding over his accounts, a process which many gentlemen besides Mr. Haley have found a specific for an uneasy conscience. The boat swept proudly away from the shore, and all went on merrily, as before. Men talked and loafed and read and smoked. Women sewed and children played, and the boat passed on her way. One day, when she lay to for a while at a small town in Kentucky, Haley went up into the place on a little matter of business. Tom, whose fetters did not prevent his taking a moderate circuit, had drawn near the side of the boat and stood listlessly gazing over the railing. After a time, he saw the trader returning with an alert step, in company with a colored woman bearing in her arms a young child. She was dressed quite respectably, and a colored man followed her, bringing along a small trunk. The woman came cheerfully onward, talking, as she came, with the man who bore her trunk, and so passed up the plank into the boat. The bell rung, the steamer whizzed, the engine groaned and coughed, and away swept the boat down the river. The woman walked forward among the boxes and bales of the lower deck, and, sitting down, busied herself with chirruping to her baby. Haley made a turn or two about the boat, and then, coming up, seated himself near her, and began saying something to her in an indifferent undertone. Tom soon noticed a heavy cloud passing over the woman's brow, and that she answered rapidly and with great vehemence. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. He heard her say, You're just a foolin' with me. If you won't believe it, look here, said the man, drawing out a paper. This here's the bill of sale, and there's your master's name to it, and I paid down good solid cash for it, too, I can tell you. So, now, I don't believe masser would cheat me so. It can't be true, said the woman, with increasing agitation. You can ask any of these men here that can read writing. Here, he said to a man that was passing by, just read this here, won't you? This, your gal won't believe me, when I tell her what tea is. Why, it's a bill of sale signed by John Fosdick, said the man, making over to you the girl Lucy and her child. It's all straight enough, for aught I see. The woman's passionate exclamations collected a crowd around her, and the trader briefly explained to them the cause of the agitation. He told me that I was going down to Louisville to hire out as cook to the same tavern where my husband works. That's what Masser told me his own self, and I can't believe he'd lie to me, said the woman. But he has sold you, my poor woman, there's no doubt about it, said a good-natured looking man who had been examining the papers. He has done it, and no mistake. Then it's no account talking, said the woman, suddenly growing quite calm, and clasping her child tighter in her arms, she sat down on her box, turned her back round, and gazed listlessly into the river. Going to take it easy, after all, said the trader. Gal's got grit, I see. The woman looked calm as the boat went on, and a beautiful soft summer breeze passed like a compassionate spirit over her head, the gentle breeze that never inquires whether the brow is dusky or fair that it fans. And she saw sunshine sparkling on the water in golden ripples, and heard gay voices, full of ease and pleasure, talking around her, everywhere. But her heart lay as if a great stone had fallen on it. Her baby raised himself up against her, and stroked her cheeks with his little hands, and springing up and down, crowing and chatting, seemed determined to arouse her. She strained him suddenly and tightly in her arms, and slowly one tear after another fell on his wondering, unconscious face, and gradually she seemed, and little by little, to grow calmer, and busied herself with tending and nursing him. The child, a boy of 10 months, was uncommonly large and strong of his age, and very vigorous in his limbs. Never, for a moment, still he kept, his mother constantly busy in holding him and guarding his springing activity. That's a fine chap, said a man, suddenly stopping opposite to him, with his hands in his pockets. How old is he? 10 months and a half, said the mother. The man whistled to the boy and offered him part of a stick of candy, which he eagerly grabbed at, and very soon had it in a baby's general depository, to wit, his mouth. Rum fellow, said the man, knows what's what, and he whistled and walked on. When he had got to the other side of the boat, he came across Haley, who was smoking on top of a pile of boxes. The stranger produced a match and lighted a cigar, saying, as he did so, decentish kind o' when you've got round there, stranger. Why, I reckon she is tolerable fair, said Haley, blowing the smoke out of his mouth. Taking her down south, said the man. Haley nodded and smoked on. Plantation hand, said the man. Wal, said Haley, I'm fillin' out an order for a plantation, and I think I shall put her in. They telled me she was a good cook, and they can use her for that, or set her at the cotton picking. She's got the right fingers for that. I looked at sell well, either way, and Haley resumed his cigar. They won't want the young on the plantation, said the man. I shall sell him first chance I find, said Haley, lighting another cigar. S'pose you be selling him tolerable cheap, said the stranger, mounting the pile of boxes and sitting down comfortably. Don't know 'bout that, said Haley. He's a pretty smart young un, straight, fat, strong, flesh as hard as a brick. Very true, but then there's the bother and expense of raisin'. Nonsense, said Haley. They is raised as easy as any kind of critter. There is going, they ain't a bit more trouble than pups. This yer chap will be running all around in a month. I've got a good place for raisin', and I thought of tacking in a little more stock, said the man. One cook lost a young un last week, got drownded in a wash-up while she was a-hangin' out the clothes, and I reckon it would be well enough to set her to raisin' this year. Haley and the stranger smoked a while in silence, neither seeming willing to broach the test question of the interview. At last the man resumed. You wouldn't think of wantin' more than $10 for that ar chap, seeing you must get him off your hand. Anyhow, Haley shook his head and spit impressively. That won't do, no ways, he said, and began his smoking again. Well, stranger, what will you take? Well, now, said Haley, I could raise that ar chap myself, or get him raised. He's uncommon likely and healthy, and he'd fetch $100, 6 months therefore, and in a year or two, he'd bring 200. If I had him in the right spot, I shan't take a cent less nor 50 for him now. Oh, stranger, that's ridiculous altogether, said the man. Fact, said Haley, with a decisive nod of his head. I'll give 30 for him, said the stranger, but not a cent more. Now, I'll tell you what I will do, said Haley, spitting again, with renewed decision. I'll split the difference and say 45, and that's the most I will do. Well, agreed, said the man, after an interval. Done, said Haley. Where do you land? At Louisville, said the man. Louisville, said Haley. Very fair, we get there about dusk. Chap will be asleep, all fair. Get him off quietly, and no screaming happens. Beautiful. I like to do everything quietly. I hates all kind of agitation and fluster. And so, after a transfer of certain bills had passed from the man's pocketbook to the trader's, he resumed his cigar. It was a bright, tranquil evening when the boat stopped at the wharf at Louisville. The woman had been sitting with her baby in her arms, now wrapped in a heavy sleep. When she heard the name of the place called out, she hastily laid the child down in a little cradle formed by the hollow among the boxes, first carefully spreading under it her cloak, and then she sprung to the side of the boat in hopes that, among the various hotel waiters who thronged the wharf, she may see her husband. In this hope, she pressed forward to the front rails and, stretching far over them, strained her eyes intently on the moving heads on the shore, and the crowd pressed in between her and the child. Now's your time, said Haley, taking the sleeping child up and handing him to the stranger. Don't wake him up and set him to crying now. It would make a devil of a fuss with the gal. The man took the bundle carefully and was soon lost in the crowd that went up the wharf. When the boat, creaking and groaning and puffing, had loosed from the wharf and was beginning slowly to strain herself along, the woman returned to her old seat. The trader was sitting there. The child was gone. Why, where? She began in bewildered surprise. Lucy, said the trader, your child's gone. You may as well know it, first as last. You see, I knowed you couldn't take him down south, and I got a chance to sell him to a first-rate family that'll raise him better than you can. The trader had arrived at that stage of Christian and political perfection which has been recommended by some preachers and politicians of the North lately, in which he had completely overcome every humane weakness and prejudice. His heart was exactly where yours, sir, and mine could be brought with proper effort and cultivation. The wild look of anguish and utter despair that the woman cast on him may have disturbed one less practiced, but he was used to it. He had seen that same look hundreds of times. You can get used to such things, too, my friend, and it is the great object of recent efforts to make our whole northern community used to them for the glory of the Union. So the trader only regarded the mortal anguish which he saw working in those dark features, those clenched hands and suffocating breathings as necessary incidents of the trade, and merely calculated whether she was going to scream and get up a commotion on the boat. For, like other supporters of our peculiar institution, he decidedly disliked agitation. But the woman did not scream. The shot had passed too straight and direct through the heart for cry or tear. Dizzily she sat down. Her slack hands fell lifeless by her side. Her eyes looked straight forward, but she saw nothing. All the noise and hum of the boat, the groaning of the machinery, mingled dreamily to her bewildered ear, and the poor, dumb-stricken heart had neither cry nor tear to show for its utter misery. she was quite calm. The traitor, who, considering his advantages, was almost as humane as some of our politicians, seemed to feel called on to administer such consolation as the case admitted of. I know this here comes kinder hard at first, Lucy, said he, but such a smart, sensible gal as you are won't give way to it. You see it's necessary and can't be helped. Though, don't, masser, don't, said the woman with a voice like one that is smothering. You're a smart wench, Lucy, he persisted. I mean to do well by ye, and get ye a nice place down river, and you'll soon get another husband, such a likely gal as you. Oh, masser, if you only won't talk to me now, said the woman in a voice of such quick and living anguish that the trader felt that there was something at present in the case beyond his style of operation. He got up, and the woman turned away and buried her head in her cloak. The trader walked up and down for a time, and occasionally stopped and looked at her. Takes it hard, rather, he soliloquized, but quiet, though. Let her sweat a while, she'll come right soon. Tom had watched the whole transaction from first to last, and had a perfect understanding of its results. To him, it looked like something unutterably horrible and cruel, because, poor, ignorant black soul, he had not learned to generalize and to take enlarged views. If he had only been instructed by certain ministers of Christianity, he may have thought better of it and seen in it an everyday incident of a lawful trade, a trade which is the vital support of an institution which an American divine asterisk tells us has no evils but such as are inseparable from any other relations in social and domestic life. But Tom, as we see, being a poor, ignorant fellow whose reading had been confined entirely to the New Testament, could not comfort and solace himself with views like these. His very soul bled within him for what seemed to him the wrongs of the poor suffering thing that lay like a crushed reed on the boxes, the feeling, living, bleeding, yet immortal thing which American state law coolly classes with the bundles and bales and boxes among which she is lying. Asterisk Dr. Joel Parker of Philadelphia. Mrs. Stowe's note. Presbyterian clergyman 1799–1873, a friend of the Beecher family. Mrs. Stowe attempted unsuccessfully to have this identifying note removed from the stereotype plate of the first edition. Tom drew near and tried to say something, but she only groaned. Honestly, and with tears running down his own cheeks, he spoke of a heart of love in the skies, of a pitying Jesus and an eternal home. But the ear was deaf with anguish, and the palsied heart could not feel. Night came on, night calm, unmoved, and glorious, shining down with her innumerable and solemn angel eyes, twinkling, beautiful, but silent. There was no speech nor language, no pitying voice or helping hand from that distant sky. One after another, the voices of business or pleasure died away. All on the boat were sleeping, and the ripples at the prow were plainly heard. Tom stretched himself out on a box, and there, as he lay, he heard, ever and soon, a smothered sob or cry from the prostrate creature. Oh, what shall I do? Oh Lord, oh good Lord, do help me. And so, ever and soon, until the murmur died away in silence. At midnight, Tom waked with a sudden start. Something black passed quickly by him to the side of the boat, and he heard a splash in the water. No one else saw or heard anything. He raised his head. The woman's place was vacant. He got up and sought about him in vain. The poor bleeding heart was still at last, and the river rippled and dimpled just as brightly as if it had not closed above it. Patience, patience, ye whose hearts swell indignant at wrongs like these. Not one throb of anguish, not one tear of the oppressed, is forgotten by the man of sorrows, the Lord of glory. In his patient, generous bosom he bears the anguish of a world. Bear you, like him, in patience and labor in love, for sure as he is God, the year of his redeemed shall come. The trader waked up bright and early and came out to see to his live stock. It was now his turn to look about in perplexity. "Where alive is that gal?" he said to Tom. Tom, who had learned the wisdom of keeping counsel, did not feel called upon to state his observations and suspicions, but said he did not know. "She surely couldn't have got off in the night at any of the landings, for I was awake and on the lookout whenever the boat stopped. I never trust these here things to other folks." This speech was addressed to Tom quite confidentially, as if it was something that would be specially interesting to him. Tom made no answer. The trader searched the boat from stem to stern, among boxes, bales, and barrels, around the machinery, by the chimneys, in vain. "Now, I say, Tom, be fair about this year," he said, when, after a fruitless search, he came where Tom was standing. "You know something about it, now. Don't tell me. I know you do. I saw the gal stretched out here about 10 o'clock, an agin at 12, an agin between 1 and 2, and then at 4 she was gone, and you was a-sleeping right there all the time. Now, you know something, you can't help it." "Well, masser," said Tom, "towards morning something brushed by me, and I kinder half woke, and then I hearn a great splash, and then I clear woke up and the gal was gone. That's all I know on tea." The trader was not shocked nor amazed, because, as we said before, he was used to a great many things that you are not used to. Evening the awful presence of death struck no solemn chill upon him. He had seen death many times, met him in the way of trade, and got acquainted with him, and he only thought of him as a hard customer that embarrassed his property operations very unfairly, and so he only swore that the gal was a baggage, and that he was devilish unlucky, and that, if things went on in this way, he should not make a cent on the trip. In short, he seemed to consider himself an ill-used man, decidedly, but there was no help for it, as the woman had escaped into a state which never will give up a fugitive, not even at the demand of the whole glorious Union. The trader, therefore, sat discontentedly down with his little account book and put down the missing body and soul under the head of losses. Exclamation. "He's a shocking creature, isn't he, this trader? So unfeeling. It's dreadful, really. Oh, but nobody thinks anything of these traders. They are universally despised, never received into any decent society. But who, sir, makes the trader? Who is most to blame? The enlightened, cultivated, intelligent man who supports the system of which the trader is the inevitable result, or the poor trader himself. You make the public statement that calls for his trade, that debauches and depraves him till he feels no shame in it. And in what are you better than he? Are you educated and he ignorant, you high and he low, you refined and he coarse, you talented and he simple? In the day of a future judgment, these very considerations may make it more tolerable for him than for you. In concluding these little incidents of lawful trade, we must beg the world not to think that American legislators are entirely destitute of humanity, as may, perhaps, be unfairly inferred from the great efforts made in our national body to protect and perpetuate this species of traffic. Who does not know how our great men are outdoing themselves in declaiming against the foreign slave trade? There are a perfect host of Clarksons and Wilberforces risen up among us on that subject, most edifying to hear and behold. Trading Negroes from Africa, dear reader, is so horrid, it is not to be thought of, but trading them from Kentucky, that's quite another thing. Chapter 13. The Quaker Settlement. A quiet scene now rises before us. A large, roomy, neatly painted kitchen, its yellow floor glossy and smooth and without a particle of dust, a neat, well-blacked cooking stove, rows of shining tin, suggestive of unmentionable good things to the appetite, glossy green wood chairs, old and firm, a small flat-bottomed rocking chair with a patchwork cushion in it, neatly contrived out of small pieces of different colored woolen goods, and a larger sized one, motherly and old, whose wide arms breathed hospitable invitation, seconded by the solicitation of its feather cushions, a real comfortable, persuasive, old chair, and worth, in the way of honest, homely enjoyment, a dozen of your plush or brochetelle drawing-room gentry, and in the chair, gently swaying back and forward, her eyes bent on some fine sewing, sat our fine old friend Eliza. Yes, there she is, paler and thinner than in her Kentucky home, with a world of quiet sorrow lying under the shadow of her long eyelashes, and marking the outline of her gentle mouth. It was plain to see how old and firm the girlish heart was grown under the discipline of heavy sorrow, and when, soon, her large dark eye was raised to follow the gambols of her little Harry, who was sporting, like some tropical butterfly, here and there over the floor, she showed a depth of firmness and steady resolve that was never there in her earlier and happier days. By her side sat a woman with a bright tin pan in her lap, into which she was carefully sorting some dried peaches. She may be 55 or 60, but hers was one of those faces that time seems to touch only to brighten and adorn. The snowy list crepe cap made after the straight Quaker pattern, the plain white muslin handkerchief lying in placid folds across her bosom, the drab shawl and dress showed at once the community to which she belonged. Her face was round and rosy, with a healthful downy softness, suggestive of a ripe peach. Her hair, partially silvered by age, was parted smoothly back from a high placid forehead, on which time had written no inscription, except peace on earth, goodwill to men, and beneath shone a large pair of clear, honest, loving brown eyes. You only needed to look straight into them to feel that you saw to the bottom of a heart as good and true as ever throbbed in woman's bosom. So much has been said and sung of beautiful young girls. Why don't somebody wake up to the beauty of old women? If any want to get up an inspiration under this head, we refer them to our good friend Rachel Halliday, just as she sits there in her little rocking chair. It had a turn for quacking and squeaking. That chair had, either from having taken cold in early life, or from some asthmatic affection, or perhaps from nervous derangement, but, as she gently swung backward and forward, the chair kept up a kind of subdued, creachy-crotchy, that would have been intolerable in any other chair, but old Simon Halliday often declared it was as good as any music to him, and the children all avowed that they wouldn't miss of hearing mother's chair for anything in the world. For why? For 20 years, or more, nothing but loving words and gentle moralities and motherly, loving kindness had come from that chair. Headaches and heartaches innumerable had been cured there, difficulties spiritual and temporal solved there, all by one good, loving woman. God bless her. And so you still thinks of going to Canada, Eliza? She said, as she was quietly looking over her peaches. Yes, ma'am, said Eliza, firmly. I must go onward. I dare not stop. And what'll you do when you gets there? You must think about that, my daughter. My daughter came naturally from the lips of Rachel Halliday, for hers was just the face and form that made mother seem the most natural word in the world. Eliza's hands trembled and some tears fell on her fine work, but she answered firmly, I shall do anything I can find. I hope I can find something. You knows you can stay here as long as you pleases, said Rachel. Oh, thank you, said Eliza, but she pointed to Harry. I can't sleep. Nights, I can't rest. Last night I dreamed I saw that man coming into the yard, she said, shuddering. Poor child, said Rachel, wiping her eyes, but you mustn't feel so. The Lord has ordered it so that never has a fugitive been stolen from our village. I trust yours will not be the first. The door here opened, and a little short, round, pincushiony woman stood at the door with a cheery, blooming face like a ripe apple. She was dressed, like Rachel, in sober gray, with the muslin folded neatly across her round, plump little chest. Ruth Stedman, said Rachel, coming joyfully forward. How is you, Ruth? She said, heartily, taking both her hands. Nicely, said Ruth, taking off her little drab bonnet and dusting it with her handkerchief, displaying, as she did so, a round little head, on which the Quaker cap sat with a sort of jaunty air, despite all the stroking and patting of the small fat hands, which were busily applied to arranging it. Certain stray locks of decidedly curly hair, too, had escaped here and there, and had to be coaxed and cajoled into their place again, and then the newcomer, who may have been 25, turned from the small looking-glass, before which she had been making these arrangements, and looked well pleased, as most people who looked at her may have been, for she was decidedly a wholesome, whole-hearted, chirruping little woman, as ever gladdened man's heart withal. Ruth, this friend is Eliza Harris, and this is the little boy I told you of. I am glad to see you, Eliza. Very, said Ruth, shaking hands, as if Eliza were an old friend she had long been expecting. And this is your dear boy. I brought a cake for him, she said, holding out a little heart to the boy, who came up, gazing through his curls, and accepted it shyly. Where's your baby, Ruth? Said Rachel. Oh, he's coming. But your Mary caught him as I came in, and ran off with him to the barn to show him to the children. At this moment, the door opened, and Mary, an honest, rose-looking girl with large brown eyes like her mother's, came in with the baby. Ah, ha, said Rachel, coming up and taking the great, white, fat fellow in her arms. How good he looks, and how he does grow. To be sure he does, said little bustling Ruth, as she took the child and began taking off a little blue silk hood and various layers and wrappers of outer garments, and having given a twitch here and a pull there, and variously adjusted and arranged him, and kissed him heartily, she set him on the floor to collect his thoughts. Baby seemed quite used to this mode of proceeding, for he put his thumb in his mouth as if it were quite a thing of course, and seemed soon absorbed in his own reflections, while the mother seated herself, and taking out a long stocking of mixed blue and white yarn, began to knit with briskness. Mary, you'd better fill the kettle, hadn't you? Gently suggested the mother. Mary took the kettle to the well, and soon reappearing, placed it over the stove, where it was soon purring and steaming, a sort of censer of hospitality and good cheer. The peaches, moreover, in obedience to a few gentle whispers from Rachel, were soon deposited by the same hand in a stewpan over the fire. Rachel now took down a snowy moulding board, and, tying on an apron, proceeded quietly to making up some biscuits, first saying to Mary, Mary, hadn't you better tell John to get a chicken ready? And Mary disappeared accordingly. And how is Abigail Peters? Said Rachel, as she went on with her biscuits. Oh, she's better, said Ruth. I was in this morning, made the bed, tidied up the house. Lee Hills went in this afternoon and baked bread and pies enough to last some days, and I engaged to go back to get her up this evening. I will go in tomorrow and do any cleaning there may be, and look over the mending, said Rachel. Ah, that is well, said Ruth. I've heard, she added, that Hannah Stanwood is sick. John was up there last night. I must go there tomorrow. John can come in here to his meals if you needs to stay all day, suggested Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. We'll see tomorrow. But here comes Simon. Simon Halliday, a tall, straight, muscular man in drab coat and pantaloons and broad-brimmed hat, now entered. How is you, Ruth? He said, warmly, as he spread his broad open hand for her little fat palm. And how is John? Oh, John is well, and all the rest of our folks, said Ruth, cheerily. Any news, father? Said Rachel, as she was putting her biscuits into the oven. Peter Stebbins told me that they should be along tonight with friends, said Simon, significantly, as he was washing his hands at a neat sink in a little back porch. Truly, said Rachel, looking thoughtfully and glancing at Eliza. Did you say your name was Harris? Said Simon to Eliza as he re-entered. Rachel glanced quickly at her husband as Eliza tremulously answered, yes, her fears, ever uppermost, suggesting that possibly there may be advertisements out for her. Mother, said Simon, standing in the porch and calling Rachel out. What does you want, father? Said Rachel, rubbing her floury hands as she went into the porch. This child's husband is in the settlement and will be here tonight, said Simon. Now, you doesn't say that, father, said Rachel, all her face radiant with joy. It's really true. Peter was down yesterday with the wagon to the other stand, and there he found an old woman and two men, and one said his name was George Harris, and from what he told of his history, I am certain who he is. He is a bright, likely fellow, too. Shall we tell her now? Said Simon. Let's tell Ruth, said Rachel. Here, Ruth. Come here. Ruth laid down her knitting work and was in the back porch in a moment. Ruth, what does you think? Said Rachel. Father says Eliza's husband is in the last company and will be here tonight. A burst of joy from the little quakeress interrupted the speech. She gave such a bound from the floor as she clapped her little hands that 2 stray curls fell from under her Quaker cap and lay brightly on her white neckerchief. Hush you, dear, said Rachel, gently. Hush, Ruth. Tell us, shall we? Tell her now. Now, to be sure, this very minute. Why, now, suppose T was my John, how should I feel? Do tell her, right off. You uses thyself only to learn how to love your neighbor, Ruth, said Simon, looking with a beaming face on Ruth. To be sure, isn't it what we are made for? If I didn't love John and the baby, I should not know how to feel for her. Come, now do tell her, do. And she laid her hands persuasively on Rachel's arm. Take her into your bedroom, there, and let me fry the chicken while you does it. Rachel came out into the kitchen, where Eliza was sewing, and opening the door of a small bedroom, said gently, Come in here with me, my daughter. I have news to tell you. The blood flushed in Eliza's pale face. She rose, trembling with nervous anxiety, and looked towards her boy. No, no, said little Ruth, darting up and seizing her hands. Never, you fear. It's good news, Eliza. Go in. Go in. And she gently pushed her to the door which closed after her, and then, turning round, she caught little Harry in her arms and began kissing him. You'll see your father, little one. Does you know it? Your father is coming, she said over and over again as the boy looked wonderingly at her. Meanwhile, within the door, another scene was going on. Rachel Halliday drew Eliza toward her and said, The Lord has had mercy on you, daughter. Your husband has escaped from the house of bondage. The blood flushed to Eliza's cheek in a sudden glow and went back to her heart with as sudden a rush. She sat down, pale and faint. Have courage, child, said Rachel, laying her hand on her head. He is among friends who will bring him here tonight. Tonight, Eliza repeated. Tonight. The words lost all meaning to her. Her head was dreamy and confused. All was mist for a moment. When she awoke, she found herself snugly tucked up on the bed, with a blanket over her, and little Ruth rubbing her hands with camphor. She opened her eyes in a state of dreamy, delicious languor, such as one who has long been bearing a heavy load and now feels it gone and would rest. The tension of the nerves, which had never ceased a moment since the first hour of her flight, had given way, and a strange feeling of security and rest came over her, and as she lay, with her large, dark eyes open, she followed, as in a quiet dream, the motions of those about her. She saw the door open into the other room, saw the supper table with its snowy cloth, heard the dreamy murmur of the singing tea kettle, saw Ruth tripping backward and forward with plates of cake and saucers of preserves, and ever and soon stopping to put a cake into Harry's hand, or pat his head, or twine his long curls round her snowy fingers. She saw the ample, motherly form of Rachel as she ever and soon came to the bedside and smoothed and arranged something about the bedclothes and gave a tuck here and there by way of expressing her goodwill, and was conscious of a kind of sunshine beaming down upon her from her large, clear, brown eyes. She saw Ruth's husband come in, saw her fly up to him and commence whispering very earnestly, ever and soon, with impressive gesture, pointing her little finger toward the room. She saw her, with the baby in her arms, sitting down to tea. She saw them all at table, and little Harry in a high chair under the shadow of Rachel's ample wing. There were low murmurs of talk, gentle tinkling of teaspoons, and musical clatter of cups and saucers, and all mingled in a delightful dream of rest, and Eliza slept as she had not slept before since the fearful midnight hour when she had taken her child and fled through the frosty starlight. She dreamed of a beautiful country, a land, it seemed to her, of rest, green shores, pleasant islands, and beautifully glittering water. And there, in a house which kind voices told her was a home, she saw her boy playing, freed and happy child. She heard her husband's footsteps. She felt him coming nearer. His arms were around her, his tears falling on her face, and she awoke. It was no dream. The daylight had long faded. Her child lay calmly sleeping by her side. A candle was burning dimly on the stand, and her husband was sobbing by her pillow. The next morning was a cheerful one at the Quaker house. Mother was up early and surrounded by busy girls and boys whom we had scarce time to introduce to our readers yesterday, and who all moved obediently to Rachel's gentle "you had better," or more gentle "hadn't you better," in the work of getting breakfast. For a breakfast in the luxurious valleys of Indiana is a thing complicated and multiform, and, like picking up the rose leaves and trimming the bushes in paradise, asking other hands than those of the original mother. While, therefore, John ran to the spring for fresh water, and Simon the second sifted meal for corn cakes, and Mary ground coffee, Rachel moved gently and quietly about, making biscuits, cutting up chicken, and diffusing a sort of sunny radiance over the whole proceeding generally. If there was any danger of friction or collision from the ill-regulated zeal of so many young operators, her gentle "come, come," or "I wouldn't, now," was quite sufficient to allay the difficulty. Bards have written of the cestus of Venus that turned the heads of all the world in successive generations. We had rather, for our part, have the cestus of Rachel Halliday, that kept heads from being turned and made everything go on harmoniously. We think it is more suited to our modern days, decidedly. While all other preparations were going on, Simon the elder stood in his shirt sleeves before a little looking-glass in the corner, engaged in the anti-patriarchal operation of shaving. Everything went on so sociably, so quietly, so harmoniously, in the great kitchen, it seemed so pleasant to everyone to do just what they were doing. There was such an atmosphere of mutual confidence and good fellowship everywhere. Evening. The knives and forks had a social clatter as they went onto the table, and the chicken and ham had a cheerful and joyous fizzle in the pan, as if they rather enjoyed being cooked than otherwise. And when George and Eliza and little Harry came out, they met such a hearty, rejoicing welcome. No wonder it seemed to them like a dream. At last, they were all seated at breakfast, while Mary stood at the stove, baking griddle cakes which, as they gained the true exact golden brown tint of perfection, were transferred quite handily to the table. Rachel never looked so truly and benignly happy as at the head of her table. There was so much motherliness and full-heartedness evening in the way she passed a plate of cakes or poured a cup of coffee, that it seemed to put a spirit into the food and drink she offered. It was the first time that ever George had sat down on equal terms at any white man's table, and he sat down, at first, with some constraint and awkwardness, but they all exhaled and went off like fog in the genial morning rays of this simple, overflowing kindness. This, truly, was a home, a word that George had never yet known a meaning for, and a belief in God and trust in his providence began to encircle his heart as with a golden cloud of protection and confidence. Dark, misanthropic, pining atheistic doubts and fierce despair melted away before the light of a living gospel breathed in living faces, preached by 1,000 unconscious acts of love and good will, which, like the cup of cold water given in the name of a disciple, shall never lose their reward. "Father, what if you should get found out again?" said Simon second, as he buttered his cake. "I should pay my fine," said Simon, quietly. "But what if they put you in prison? Couldn't you and Mother manage the farm?" said Simon, smiling. "Mother can do almost everything," said the boy. "But isn't it a shame to make such laws? You mustn't speak evil of your rulers, Simon," said his father, gravely. "The Lord only gives us our worldly goods, that we may do justice and mercy. If our rulers require a price of us for it, we must deliver it up." "Well, I hate those old slaveholders," said the boy, who felt as unchristian as became any modern reformer. "I am surprised at you, son," said Simon. "Your mother never taught you so." "I would do evening the same for the slaveholder as for the slave, if the Lord brought him to my door in affliction." Simon second blushed scarlet, but his mother only smiled and said, "Simon is my good boy. He will grow older soon, and then he will be like his father. I hope, my good sir, that you are not exposed to any difficulty on our account," said George, anxiously. "Fear nothing, George, for therefore are we sent into the world. If we would not meet trouble for a good cause, we were not worthy of our name. But, for me," said George, "I could not bear it." "Fear not, then, friend George, it is not for you, but for God and man, we do it," said Simon. "And now you must lie by quietly this day, and tonight, at 10 o'clock, Phineas Fletcher will carry you onward to the next stand, you and the rest of the company. The pursuers are hard after you. We must not delay." "If that is the case, why wait till evening?" said George. "You are safe here by daylight, for every one in the settlement is a friend and all are watching." Chapter 14. Evangeline, a young star, which shone, o'er life, too sweet an image for such glass, a lovely being, scarcely formed or molded, a rose with all its sweetest leaves yet folded. The Mississippi, how, as by an enchanted wand, have its scenes been changed since Chateaubriand wrote his prose poetic description of it, as a river of mighty, unbroken solitudes, rolling amid undreamed wonders of vegetable and animal existence, in Atala, or the love and constancy of two savages in the desert. 1801 by Francois Auguste René, Vicomte de Chateaubriand, 1768-1848. But as in an hour, this river of dreams and wild romance has emerged to a reality scarcely less visionary and splendid. What other river of the world bears on its bosom to the ocean the wealth and enterprise of such another country? A country whose products embrace all between the tropics and the poles. Those turbid waters, hurrying, foaming, tearing along, an apt resemblance of that headlong tide of business which is poured along its wave by a race more vehement and energetic than any the old world ever saw. Ah, would that they did not also bear along a more fearful freight, the tears of the oppressed, the sighs of the helpless, the bitter prayers of poor, ignorant hearts to an unknown God, unknown, unseen, and silent, but who will yet come out of his place to save all. The poor of the earth. The slanting light of the setting sun quivers on the sea-like expanse of the river, The shivery canes and the tall, dark cypress, hung with wreaths of dark, funereal moss, glow in the golden ray as the heavily laden steamboat marches onward. Piled with cotton bales from many a plantation, up over deck and sides, till she seems in the distance a square, massive block of gray, she moves heavily onward to the nearing mart. We must look some time among its crowded decks before we shall find again our humble friend Tom. High on the upper deck, in a little nook among the everywhere predominant cotton bales, at last we may find him, partly from confidence inspired by Mr. Shelby's representations and partly from the remarkably inoffensive and quiet character of the man. Tom had insensibly won his way far into the confidence evening of such a man as Haley. At first he had watched him narrowly through the day and never allowed him to sleep at night unfettered. But the uncomplaining patience and apparent contentment of Tom's manner led him gradually to discontinue these restraints, and for some time Tom had enjoyed a sort of parole of honor, being permitted to come and go freely where he pleased on the boat, ever quiet and obliging, and more than ready to lend a hand in every emergency which occurred among the workmen below. He had won the good opinion of all the hands, and spent many hours in helping them with as hearty a good will as ever he worked on a Kentucky farm. When there seemed to be nothing for him to do, he would climb to a nook among the cotton bales of the upper deck and busy himself in studying over his Bible, and it is there we see him now. For 100 or more miles above New Orleans, the river is higher than the surrounding country, and rolls its tremendous volume between massive levees 20 feet in height. The traveler from the deck of the steamer, as from some floating castle top, overlooks the whole country for miles and miles around. Tom, therefore, had spread out full before him, in plantation after plantation, a map of the life to which he was approaching. He saw the distant slaves at their toil. He saw afar their villages of huts gleaming out in long rows on many a plantation, distant from the stately mansions and pleasure grounds of the master, and as the moving picture passed on, his poor, foolish heart would be turning backward to the Kentucky farm with its old shadowy beeches, to the master's house with its wide, cool halls, and nearby the little cabin overgrown with the multiflora and bignonia. There he seemed to see familiar faces of comrades who had grown up with him from infancy. He saw his busy wife bustling in her preparations for his evening meals. He heard the merry laugh of his boys at their play, and the cheer up of the baby at his knee, and then, with a start, all faded, and he saw again the canebrakes and cypresses and gliding plantations, and heard again the creaking and groaning of the machinery, all telling him too plainly that all that phase of life had gone by forever. In such a case, you write to your wife and send messages to your children, but Tom could not write. The mail for him had no existence, and the gulf of separation was unbridged by even a friendly word or signal. Is it strange, then, that some tears fall on the pages of his Bible as he lays it on the cotton bale, and, with patient finger, threading his slow way from word to word, traces out its promises? Having learned late in life, Tom was but a slow reader, and passed on laboriously from verse to verse. Fortunate for him was it that the book he was intent on was one which slow reading cannot injure, no, one whose words, like ingots of gold, seem often to need to be weighed separately, that the mind may take in their priceless value. Let us follow him a moment as, pointing to each word and pronouncing each half aloud, he reads, "Let not your heart be troubled. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you." Cicero, when he buried his darling and only daughter, had a heart as full of honest grief as poor Tom's, perhaps no fuller, for both were only men. But Cicero could pause over no such sublime words of hope, and look to no such future reunion, and if he had seen them, 10 to 1 he would not have believed. He must fill his head first with 1,000 questions of authenticity of manuscript and correctness of translation. But to poor Tom, there it lay, just what he needed, so evidently true and divine that the possibility of a question never entered his simple head. It must be true, for if not true, how could he live? As for Tom's Bible, though it had no annotations and helps in margin from learned commentators, still it had been embellished with certain waymarks and guide boards of Tom's own invention, and which helped him more than the most learned expositions could have done. It had been his custom to get the Bible read to him by his master's children, in particular by young Master George, and as they read he would designate by bold, strong marks and dashes with pen and ink the passages which more particularly gratified his ear or affected his heart. His Bible was thus marked through, from one end to the other, with a variety of styles and designations, so he could in a moment seize upon his favorite passages, without the labor of spelling out what lay between them. And while it lay there before him, every passage, breathing of some old home scene, and recalling some past enjoyment, his Bible seemed to him all of this life that remained, as well as the promise of a future one. Among the passengers on the boat was a young gentleman of fortune and family, resident in New Orleans, who bore the name of St. Clair. He had with him a daughter between 5 and 6 years of age, together with a lady who seemed to claim relationship to both, and to have the little one especially under her charge. Tom had often caught glimpses of this little girl, for she was one of those busy, tripping creatures that can be no more contained in one place than a sunbeam or a summer breeze, nor was she one that, once seen, could be easily forgotten. Her form was the perfection of childish beauty, without its usual chubbiness and squareness of outline. There was about it an undulating, an aerial grace, such as one may dream of for some mythic and allegorical being. Her face was remarkable less for its perfect beauty of feature than for a singular and dreamy earnestness of expression, which made the ideal start when they looked at her, and by which the dullest and most literal were impressed, without exactly knowing why. The shape of her head and the turn of her neck and bust was peculiarly noble, and the long golden brown hair that floated like a cloud around it, the deep spiritual gravity of her violet blue eyes, shaded by heavy fringes of golden brown, all marked her out from other children and made every one turn and look after her as she glided here and there on the boat. Nevertheless, the little one was not what you would have called either a grave child or a sad one. On the contrary, an airy and innocent playfulness seemed to flicker like the shadow of summer leaves over her childish face and around her buoyant figure. She was always in motion, always with a half smile on her rosy mouth, flying here and there with an undulating and cloud-like tread, singing to herself as she moved as in a happy dream. Her father and female guardian were incessantly busy in pursuit of her, but when caught, she melted from them again like a summer cloud, and as no word of chiding or reproof ever fell on her ear for whatever she chose to do, she pursued her own way all over the boat. Always dressed in white, she seemed to move like a shadow through all sorts of places, without contracting spot or stain, and there was not a corner or nook, above or below, where those fairy footsteps had not glided, and that visionary golden head, with its deep blue eyes, fleeted along. The fireman, as he looked up from his sweaty toil, sometimes found those eyes looking wonderingly into the raging depths of the furnace, and fearfully and pityingly at him, as if she thought him in some dreadful danger. Soon the steersman at the wheel paused and smiled as the picture-like head gleamed through the window of the round house, and in a moment was gone again. 1,000 times a day rough voices blessed her, and smiles of unwonted softness stole over hard faces as she passed, and when she tripped fearlessly over dangerous places, rough, sooty hands were stretched involuntarily out to save her and smooth her path. Tom, who had the soft, impressible nature of his kindly race, ever yearning toward the simple and childlike, watched the little creature with daily increasing interest. To him she seemed something almost divine, and whenever her golden head and deep blue eyes peered out upon him from behind some dusky cotton veil, or looked down upon him over some ridge of packages, he half believed that he saw one of the angels stepped out of his New Testament. Often and often she walked mournfully round the place where Haley's gang of men and women sat in their chains. She would glide in among them and look at them with an air of perplexed and sorrowful earnestness, and sometimes she would lift their chains with her slender hands and then sigh woefully as she glided away. Several times she appeared suddenly among them with her hands full of candy, nuts, and oranges, which she would distribute joyfully to them, and then be gone again. Tom watched the little lady a great deal before he ventured on any overtures towards acquaintanceship. He knew an abundance of simple acts to propitiate and invite the approaches of the little people, and he resolved to play his part right skillfully. He could cut cunning little baskets out of cherry stones, could make grotesque faces on hickory nuts, or odd jumping figures out of elderpith, and he was a very pan in the manufacture of whistles of all sizes and sorts. His pockets were full of miscellaneous articles of attraction, which he had hoarded in days of old for his master's children, and which he now produced with commendable prudence and economy, one by one, as overtures for acquaintance and friendship. The little one was shy, for all her busy interest in everything going on, and it was not easy to tame her. For a while she would perch like a canary bird on some box or package near Tom, while busy in the little arts aforenamed, and take from him, with a kind of grave bashfulness, the little articles he offered. But at last they got on quite confidential terms. "What's little missy's name?" said Tom, at last, when he thought matters were ripe to push such an inquiry. "Evangeline St. Clair," said the little one, "though papa and everybody else call me Eva. Now, what's your name?" "My name's Tom. The little chillun used to call me Uncle Tom way back thar in Kentuck." "Then I mean to call you Uncle Tom, because, you see, I like you," said Eva. "So, Uncle Tom, where are you going?" "I don't know, Miss Eva." "Don't know," said Eva. "No, I'm going to be sold to somebody. I don't know who." "My papa can buy you," said Eva, quickly, "and if he buys you, you will have good times. I mean to ask him this very day." "Thank you, my little lady," said Tom. The boat here stopped at a small landing to take in wood, and Eva, hearing her father's voice, bounded nimbly away. Tom rose up and went forward to offer his service in wooding, and soon was busy among the hands. Eva and her father were standing together by the railings to see the boat start from the landing place. The wheel had made 2 or 3 revolutions in the water, when, by some sudden movement, the little one suddenly lost her balance and fell sheer over the side of the boat into the water. Her father, scarce knowing what he did, was plunging in after her, but was held back by some behind him, who saw that more efficient aid had followed his child. Tom was standing just under her on the lower deck as she fell. He saw her strike the water and sink, and was after her in a moment. A broad-chested, strong-armed fellow, it was nothing for him to keep afloat in the water till, in a moment or two, the child rose to the surface, and he caught her in his arms, and, swimming with her to the boat side, handed her up, all dripping, to the grasp of hundreds of hands, which, as if they had all belonged to one man, were stretched eagerly out to receive her. A few moments more, and her father bore her, dripping and senseless, to the ladies' cabin, where, as is usual in cases of the kind, there ensued a very well-meaning and kind-hearted strife among the female occupants generally, as to who should do the most things to make a disturbance, and to hinder her recovery in every way possible. It was a sultry, close day, the next day, as the steamer drew near to New Orleans. A general bustle of expectation and preparation was spread through the boat. In the cabin, one and another were gathering their things together and arranging them, preparatory to going ashore. The steward and chambermaid and all were busily engaged in cleaning, furbishing, and arranging the splendid boat preparatory to a grand entree. On the lower deck sat our friend Tom, with his arms folded and anxiously, from time to time, turning his eyes towards a group on the other side of the boat. There stood the fair Evangeline, a little paler than the day before, but otherwise exhibiting no traces of the accident which had befallen her. A graceful, elegantly formed young man stood by her, carelessly leaning one elbow on a bale of cotton while a large pocket-book lay open before him. It was quite evident at a glance that the gentleman was Eva's father. There was the same noble cast of head, the same large blue eyes, the same golden brown hair, yet the expression was wholly different. In the large, clear blue eyes, though in form and color exactly similar, there was wanting that misty, dreamy depth of expression. All was clear, bold, and bright, but with a light wholly of this world. The beautifully cut mouth had a proud and somewhat sarcastic expression, while an air of free and easy superiority sat not ungracefully in every turn and movement of his fine form. He was listening, with a good-humored, negligent air, half comic, half contemptuous, to Haley, who was very volubly expatiating on the quality of the article for which they were bargaining. All the moral and Christian virtues bound in black morocco, complete, he said, when Haley had finished. Well, now, my good fellow, what's the damage, as they say in Kentucky? In short, what's to be paid out for this business? How much are you going to cheat me? Now, out with it. Wow, said Haley, if I should say $1,300 for that fellow, I shouldn't but just save myself. I shouldn't, now, really. Poor fellow, said the young man, fixing his keen, mocking blue eye on him. But I suppose you'd let me have him for that, out of a particular regard for me. Well, the young lady here seems to be sought on him, and nately enough. Oh, certainly. There's a call on your benevolence, my friend. Now, as a matter of Christian charity, how cheap could you afford to let him go, to oblige a young lady that's particular sought on him? Well, now, just think on tea, said the trader. Just look at them. Limbs, broad-chested, strong as a horse. Look at his head, them high, foreheads alays shows calculatin' niggers. That'll do any kind o' thing. I've marked that Now, a nigger of that heft and build is worth considerable, just as you may say, for his body, supposin' he's stupid. But come to put in his calculatin' faculties, and them which I can show he has oncommon, why, of course, it makes him come higher. Why, that fellow managed his master's whole farm. He has a extraordinary talent for business. Bad, very bad, knows altogether too much, said the young man, with the same mocking smile playing about his mouth. Never will do in the world. You smart fellows are always running off, stealing horses, and raising the devil generally. I think you'll have to take off a couple of hundred for his smartness. Well, there may be something in that if it weren't for his character, but I can show recommends from his master and others to prove he is one of your real pious, the most humble, prayin', pious critter ye ever did see. Why, he's been called a preacher in them parts he came from, and I may use him for a family chaplain, possibly, added the young man, dryly. That's quite an idea. Religion is a remarkably scarce article at our house. You're joking, now. How do you know I am? Didn't you just warrant him for a preacher? Has he been examined by any synod or council? Come, hand over your papers. If the trader had not been sure, by a certain good-humored twinkle in the large eye, that all this banter was sure, in the long run, to turn out a cash concern, he may have been somewhat out of patience as it was. He laid down a greasy pocket-book on the cotton bales, and began anxiously studying over certain papers in it, the young man standing by, the while, looking down on him with an air of careless, easy drollery. Papa, do buy him. It's no matter what ye pay, whispered Eva, softly, getting up on a package, and putting her arm around her father's neck. You have money enough. I know. I want him. What for, pussy? Are you going to use him for a rattlebox or a rocking horse or what? I want to make him happy. An original reason, certainly. Here the trader handed up a certificate, signed by Mr. Shelby, which the young man took with the tips of his long fingers and glanced over carelessly. A gentlemanly hand, he said, and well spelt, too. Well, now, but I'm not sure, after all, about this religion, said he, the old wicked expression returning to his eye. The country is almost ruined with pious white people, such pious politicians as we have just before elections, such pious goings on in all departments of church and state, that a fellow does not know who'll cheat him next. I don't know, either, about religions being up in the market just now. I have not looked in the papers lately to see how it sells. How many $100, now, do you put on for this religion? You like to be jockin', now, said the trader, but then there's sense under all that are. I know there's differences in religion. Some kinds is miserable. There's your meetin' pious. There's your singin', roarin' pious. Them are ant no account, in black or white. But these, raley is, and I've seen it in niggers as often as any, you're rail softly, quiet, stiddy, honest, pious, that the hull world couldn't tempt 'em to do nothing that they thinks is wrong, and ye see in this letter what Tom's old master says about him. Now, said the young man, stooping gravely over his book of bills, if you can assure me that I really can buy this kind of pious, and that it will be set down to my account in the book up above, as something belonging to me, I wouldn't care if I did go a little extra for it. How d'ye say? Well, really, I can't do that, said the trader. I'm a thinkin' that every man'll have to hang on his own hook in them our quarters. Rather hard on a fellow that pays extra on religion and can't trade with it in the state where he wants it most, an't it, now, said the young man, who had been making out a roll of bills while he was speaking. There, count your money, old boy, he added, as he handed the roll to the trader. All right, said Haley, his face beaming with delight, and pulling out an old corn, he proceeded to fill out a bill of sale, which, in a few moments, he handed to the young man. I wonder, now, if I was divided up and inventoried, said the latter, as he ran over the paper, how much I may bring. Say so much for the shape of my head, so much for a high forehead, so much for arms and hands and legs, and then so much for education, learning, talent, honesty, religion. Bless me, there would be small charge on that last, I'm thinking. But come, Eva, he said, and taking the hand of his daughter, he stepped across the boat, and carelessly putting the tip of his finger under Tom's chin, said, good-humoredly, look up, Tom, and see how you like your new master. Tom looked up. It was not in nature to look into that gay, young, handsome face without a feeling of pleasure, and Tom felt the tears start in his eyes as he said, heartily, God bless you, masser. Well, I hope he will. What's your name, Tom? Quite as likely to do it for your asking as mine, from all counts. Can you drive horses, Tom? I've been allays used to horses, said Tom. Masser shall be raised heaps of 'em. Well, I think I shall put you in cokie, on condition that you won't be drunk more than once a week, unless in cases of emergency, Tom. Tom looked surprised and rather hurt, and said, I never drink, masser. I've heard that story before, Tom, but then we'll see. It will be a special accommodation to all concerned if you don't. Never mind, my boy, he added, good-humoredly, seeing Tom still looked grave. I don't doubt you mean to do well. I sartin do, masser, said Tom. And you shall have good times, said Eva. Papa is very good to everybody, only he always will laugh at them. Papa is much obliged to you for his recommendation, said St. Chapter 15 of Tom's New Master and various other matters. Since the thread of our humble hero's life has now become interwoven with that of higher ones, it is necessary to give some brief introduction to them. Augustine St. Clair was the son of a wealthy planter of Louisiana. The family had its origin in Canada. Of two brothers, very similar in temperament and character, one had settled on a flourishing farm in Vermont, and the other became an opulent planter in Louisiana. The mother of Augustine was a Huguenot French lady, whose family had emigrated to Louisiana during the days of its early settlement. Augustine and another brother were the only children of their parents. Having inherited from his mother an exceeding delicacy of constitution, he was, at the instance of physicians, during many years of his boyhood, sent to the care of his uncle in Vermont, in order that his constitution may be strengthened by the cold of a more bracing climate. In childhood, he was remarkable for an extreme and marked sensitiveness of character, more akin to the softness of woman than the ordinary hardness of his own sex. Time, however, overgrew this softness with the rough bark of manhood, and but few knew how living and fresh it still lay at the core. His talents were of the very first order, although his mind showed a preference always for the ideal and the aesthetic, and there was about him that repugnance to the actual business of life which is the common result of this balance of the faculties. Soon after the completion of his college course, his whole nature was kindled into one intense and passionate effervescence of romantic passion. His hour came, the hour that comes only once. His star rose in the horizon, that star that rises so often in vain, to be remembered only as a thing of dreams, and it rose for him in vain. To drop the figure he saw and won the love of a high-minded and beautiful woman in one of the northern states, and they were affianced. He returned south to make arrangements for their marriage, when most unexpectedly his letters were returned to him by mail, with a short note from her guardian, stating to him that before this reached him the lady would be the wife of another. Stung to madness, he vainly hoped, as many another has done, to fling the whole thing from his heart by one desperate effort. Too proud to supplicate or seek explanation, he threw himself at once into a whirl of fashionable society, and in a fortnight from the time of the fatal letter was the accepted lover of the reigning belle of the season, and as soon as arrangements could be made, he became the husband of a fine figure, a pair of bright dark eyes, and $100,000, and, of course, everybody thought him a happy fellow. The married couple were enjoying their honeymoon and entertaining a brilliant circle of friends in their splendid villa near Lake Pontchartrain, when, one day, a letter was brought to him in that well-remembered writing. It was handed to him while he was in full tide of gay and successful conversation in a whole room full of company. He turned deadly pale when he saw the writing, but still preserved his composure, and finished the playful warfare of badinage which he was at the moment carrying on with the lady opposite, and a short time after was missed from the circle. In his room, alone, he opened and read the letter, now worse than idle and useless to be read. It was from her, giving a long account of a persecution to which she had been exposed by her guardian's family, to lead her to unite herself with their son, and she related how, for a long time, his letters had ceased to arrive, how she had written time and again, till she became weary and doubtful, how her health had failed under her anxieties, and how, at last, she had discovered the whole fraud which had been practiced on them both. The letter ended with expressions of hope and thankfulness and professions of undying affection, which were more bitter than death to the unhappy young man. He wrote to her immediately, "I have received yours, but too late. I believed all I heard. I was desperate. I am married, and all is over. Only forget it is all that remains for either of us." And thus ended the whole romance and ideal of life for Augustine St. Clair. But the real remained, the real, like the flat, bare, oozy tide mud, when the blue sparkling wave, with all its company of gliding boats and white-winged ships, its music of oars and chiming waters, has gone down, and there it lies, flat, slimy, bare, exceedingly real. Of course, in a novel, people's hearts break and they die, and that is the end of it. And in a story, this is very convenient. But in real life, we do not die when all that makes life bright dies to us. There is a most busy and important round of eating, drinking, dressing, walking, visiting, buying, selling, talking, reading, and all that makes up what is commonly called living, yet to be gone through, and this yet remained to Augustine. Had his wife been a whole woman, she may yet have done something, as woman can, to mend the broken threads of life and weave again into a tissue of brightness. But Marie St. Clair could not even see that they had been broken. As before stated, she consisted of a fine figure, a pair of splendid eyes, and $100,000, and none of these items were precisely the ones to minister to a mind diseased. When Augustine, pale as death, was found lying on the sofa and pleaded sudden sick headache as the cause of his distress, she recommended to him to smell of hartshorn, and when the paleness and headache came on, week after week, she only said that she never thought Mr. St. Clair was sickly, but it seems he was very liable to sick headaches, and that it was a very unfortunate thing for her, because he didn't enjoy going into company with her, and it seemed odd to go so much alone. When they were just married, Augustine was glad in his heart that he had married so undiscerning a woman. But as the glosses and civilities of the honeymoon wore away, he discovered that a beautiful young woman who has lived all her life to be caressed and waited on may prove quite a hard mistress in domestic life. Marie never had possessed much capability of affection or much sensibility, and the little that she had been merged into a most intense and unconscious selfishness, a selfishness the more hopeless from its quiet obtuseness, its utter ignorance of any claims but her own. From her infancy, she had been surrounded with servants who lived only to study her caprices. The idea that they had either feelings or rights had never dawned upon her, evening in distant perspective. Her father, whose only child she had been, had never denied her anything that lay within the compass of human possibility, and when she entered life, beautiful, accomplished, and an heiress, she had, of course, all the eligibles and non-eligibles of the other sex sighing at her feet, and she had no doubt that Augustine was a most fortunate man in having obtained her. It is a great mistake to suppose that a woman with no heart will be an easy creditor in the exchange of affection. There is not on earth a more merciless exactor of love from others than a thoroughly selfish woman, and the more unlovely she grows, the more jealously and scrupulously she exacts love to the uttermost farthing. When, therefore, St. Clair began to drop off those gallantries and small attentions which flowed at first through the habitude of courtship, he found his sultana no way ready to resign her slave. There were abundance of tears, poutings, and small tempests. There were discontents, pinings, upbraidings. St. Clair was good-natured and self-indulgent, and sought to buy off with presents and flatteries, and when Marie became mother to a beautiful daughter, he really felt awakened for a time to something like tenderness. St. Clair's mother had been a woman of uncommon elevation and purity of character, and he gave to his child his mother's name, fondly fancying that she would prove a reproduction of her image. The thing had been remarked with petulant jealousy by his wife, and she regarded her husband's absorbing devotion to the child with suspicion and dislike. All that was given to her seemed so much taken from herself. From the time of the birth of this child, her health gradually sunk. A life of constant inaction, bodily and mental, the friction of ceaseless ennui and discontent, united to the ordinary weakness which attended the period of maternity, in course of a few years changed the blooming young belle into a yellow-faded, sickly woman whose time was divided among a variety of fanciful diseases, and who considered herself, in every sense, the most ill-used and suffering person in existence. There was no end of her various complaints, but her principal forte appeared to lie in sick headache, which sometimes would confine her to her room 3 days out of 6, as of course all family arrangements fell into the hands of servants. St. Clair found his manage anything but comfortable. His only daughter was exceedingly delicate, and he feared that, with no one to look after her and attend to her, her health and life may yet fall a sacrifice to her mother's inefficiency. He had taken her with him on a tour to Vermont, and had persuaded his cousin, Miss Ophelia St. Clair, to return with him to his southern residence, and they are now returning on this boat, where we have introduced them to our readers. And now, while the distant domes and spires of New Orleans rise to our view, there is yet time for an introduction to Miss Ophelia. Whoever has traveled in the New England states will remember, in some cool village, the large farmhouse, with its clean-swept grassy yard, shaded by the dense and massive foliage of the sugar maple, and remember the air of order and stillness, of perpetuity and unchanging repose that seemed to breathe over the whole place. Nothing lost or out of order, not a picket loose in the fence, not a particle of litter in the turfy yard, with its clumps of lilac bushes growing up under the windows. Within, he will remember wide, clean rooms, where nothing ever seems to be doing or going to be done, where everything is once and forever rigidly in place, and where all household arrangements move with the punctual exactness of the old clock in the corner. In the family keeping room, as it is termed, he will remember the staid, respectable, old bookcase with its glass doors, where Roland's History, Milton's Paradise Lost, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and Scott's Family Bible, stand side by side in decorous order, with multitudes of other books, equally solemn and respectable. There are no servants in the house, but the lady in the snowy cap, with the spectacles, who sits sewing every afternoon among her daughters as if nothing ever had been done, or were to be done. She and her girls, in some long-forgotten part of the day, did up the work, and for the rest of the time, probably, at all hours when you would see them, it is done up. The old kitchen floor never seems stained or spotted. The tables, the chairs, and the various cooking utensils never seem deranged or disordered, though 3 and sometimes 4 meals a day are got there, though the family washing and ironing is there performed, and though pounds of butter and cheese are, in some silent and mysterious manner, there brought into existence. The Ancient History, 10 volumes, 1730-1738. By the French historian Charles Roland, 1661-1741. Scott's Family Bible, 1788-1792. Edited with notes by the English biblical commentator Thomas Scott, 1747-1821. On such a farm, in such a house and family, Miss Ophelia had spent a quiet existence of some 45 years, when her cousin invited her to visit his southern mansion. The eldest of a large family, she was still considered by her father and mother as one of the children, and the proposal that she should go to Orleans was a most momentous one to the family circle. The old gray-headed father took down Morse's Atlas out of the bookcase and looked out the exact latitude and longitude, and read Flint's Travels in the South and West, to make up his own mind as to the nature of the country, the Serographic Atlas of the United States, 1842-1845, by Sidney Edwards Morse, 1794-1871, son of the geographer Jedediah Morse, and brother of the painter-inventor Samuel F. B. Morse. Recollections of the Last 10 Years, 1826, by Timothy Flint, 1780-1840, missionary of Presbyterianism to the Trans-Allegheny West. The good mother inquired, anxiously, if Orleans wasn't an awful wicked place, saying that it seemed to her most equal to going to the Sandwich Islands, or anywhere among the heathen. It was known at the minister's and at the doctor's and at Miss Peabody's milliner's shop that Ophelia St. Clair was talking about going way down to Orleans with her cousin, and of course the whole village could do no less than help this very important process of talking about the matter. The minister, who inclined strongly to abolitionist views, was quite doubtful whether such a step may not tend somewhat to encourage the Southerners in holding on to their slaves, while the doctor, who was a stanch colonizationist, inclined to the opinion that Miss Ophelia ought to go to show the Orleans people that we don't think hardly of them after all. He was of opinion, in fact, that Southern people needed encouraging. When, however, the fact that she had resolved to go was fully before the public mind, she was solemnly invited out to tea by all her friends and neighbors for the space of a fortnight, and her prospects and plans duly canvassed and inquired into. Miss Mosley, who came into the house to help to do the dressmaking, acquired daily accessions of importance from the developments with regard to Miss Ophelia's wardrobe which she had been enabled to make. It was credibly ascertained that Squire Sinclair, as his name was commonly contracted in the neighborhood, had counted out $50 and given them to Miss Ophelia, and told her to buy any clothes she thought best, and that 2 new silk dresses and a bonnet had been sent for from Boston. As to the propriety of this extraordinary outlay, the public mind was divided, some affirming that it was well enough, all things considered, for once in one's life, and others stoutly affirming that the money had better have been sent to the missionaries. But all parties agreed that there had been no such parasol seen in those parts as had been sent on from New York, and that she had one silk dress that may fairly be trusted to stand alone, whatever may be said of its mistress. There were credible rumors also of a hem-stitched pocket handkerchief, and report evening went so far as to state that Miss Ophelia had one pocket handkerchief with lace all around it. It was evening added that it was worked in the corners, but this latter point was never satisfactorily ascertained and remains, in fact, unsettled to this day. Miss Ophelia, as you now behold her, stands before you in a very shining brown linen traveling dress, tall, square-formed, and angular. Her face was thin and rather sharp in its outlines, the lips compressed, like those of a person who is in the habit of making up her mind definitely on all subjects, while the keen, dark eyes had a peculiarly searching, advised movement, and traveled over everything as if they were looking for something to take care of. All her movements were sharp, decided, and energetic, and though she was never much of a talker, her words were remarkably direct and to the purpose when she did speak. In her habits, she was a living impersonation of order, method, and exactness. In punctuality, she was as inevitable as a clock and as inexorable as a railroad engine, and she held in most decided contempt and abomination anything of a contrary character. The great sin of sins, in her eyes, the sum of all evils, was expressed by one very common and important word in her vocabulary: shiftlessness. Her finale and ultimatum of contempt consisted in a very emphatic pronunciation of the word shiftless, and by this she characterized all modes of procedure which had not a direct and inevitable relation to accomplishment of some purpose then definitely had in mind. People who did nothing, or who did not know exactly what they were going to do, or who did not take the most direct way to accomplish what they set their hands to, were objects of her entire contempt, a contempt shown less frequently by anything she said than by a kind of stony grimace, as if she scorned to say anything about the matter. As to mental cultivation, she had a clear, strong, active mind, was well and thoroughly read in history and the older English classics, and thought with great strength within certain narrow limits. Her theological tenets were all made up, labeled in most positive and distinct forms, and put by, like the bundles in her patched trunk. There were just so many of them, and there were never to be any more. So, also, were her ideas with regard to most matters of practical life, such as housekeeping in all its branches and the various political relations of her native village. And underlying all Deeper than anything else, higher and broader, lay the strongest principle of her being, conscientiousness. Nowhere is conscience so dominant and all-absorbing as with New England women. It is the granite formation which lies deepest and rises out, evening to the tops of the highest mountains. Miss Ophelia was the absolute bond-slave of the ought. Once make her certain that the path of duty, as she commonly phrased it, lay in any given direction, and fire and water could not keep her from it. She would walk straight down into a well or up to a loaded cannon's mouth, if she were only quite sure that there the path lay. Her standard of right was so high, so all-embracing, so minute, and making so few concessions to human frailty, that, though she strove with heroic ardor to reach it, she never actually did so, and of course was burdened with a constant and often harassing sense of deficiency. This gave a severe and somewhat gloomy cast to her religious character. But how in the world can Miss Ophelia get along with Augustine St. Clair, gay, easy, and punctual, and practical, skeptical, in short, walking with impudent and nonchalant freedom over every one of her most cherished habits and opinions? To tell the truth, then, Miss Ophelia loved him. When a boy, it had been hers to teach him his catechism, mend his clothes, comb his hair, and bring him up generally in the way he should go, and her heart having a warm side to it, Augustine had, as he usually did with most people, monopolized a large share of it for himself, and therefore it was that he succeeded very easily in persuading her that the path of duty lay in the direction of New Orleans, and that she must go with him to take care of Eva, and keep everything from going to wreck and ruin during the frequent illnesses of his wife. The idea of a house without anybody to take care of it went to her heart. Then she loved the lovely little girl as few could help doing, and though she regarded Augustine as very much of a heathen, yet she loved him, laughed at his jokes, and forbore with his failings to an extent which those who knew him thought perfectly incredible. But what more or other is to be known of Miss Ophelia our reader must discover by a personal acquaintance. There she is, sitting now in her stateroom, surrounded by a mixed multitude of little and big carpet bags, boxes, baskets, each containing some separate responsibility which she is tying, binding up, packing, or fastening, with a face of great earnestness. Now, Eva, have you kept count of your things? Of course you haven't. Children never do. There's the spotted carpet bag and a little blue band box with your best bonnet. That's 2. Then the India rubber satchel is 3, and my tape and needle box is 4, and my band box 5, and my collar box and that little hair trunk 7. What have you done with your sunshade? Give it to me, and let me put a paper round it, and tie it to my umbrella with my shade. There, now. Why, Andy, we are only going up home. What is the use? To keep it nice, child. People must take care of their things if they ever mean to have anything. And now, Eva, is your thimble put up? Really, Andy, I don't know. Well, never mind. I'll look your box over. Thimble, wax, 2 spools, scissors, knife, tape, needle, all right. Put it in here. What did you ever do, child, when you were coming on with only your papa? I should have thought you'd lost everything you had. Well, Andy, I did lose a great many, and then, when we stopped anywhere, papa would buy some more of whatever it was. Mercy on us, child, what a way. It was a very easy way, Andy, said Eva. It's a dreadful shiftless one, said Andy. Why, Andy, what'll you do now? Said Eva. That trunk is too full to be shut down. It must shut down, said Andy, with the air of a general, as she squeezed the things in and sprung upon the lid. Still a little gap remained about the mouth of the trunk. Get up here, Eva, said Miss Ophelia, courageously. What has been done can be done again. This trunk has got to be shut and locked. There are no 2 ways about it. And the trunk, intimidated, doubtless, by this resolute statement, gave in The hasp snapped sharply in its hole, and Miss Ophelia turned the key and pocketed it in triumph. Now we're ready. Where's your papa? I think it time this baggage was set out. Do look out, Eva, and see if you see your papa. Oh, yes, he's down the other end of the gentleman's cabin, eating an orange. He can't know how near we are coming, said Auntie. Hadn't you better run and speak to him? Papa never is in a hurry about anything, said Eva, and we haven't come to the landing. Do step on the guards, Auntie. Look, there's our house up that street. The boat now began, with heavy groans, like some vast, tired monster, to prepare to push up among the multiplied steamers at the levee. Eva joyously pointed out the various spires, domes, and waymarks by which she recognized her native city. Yes, yes, dear, very fine, said Miss Ophelia. But mercy on us. The boat has stopped. Where is your father? And now ensued the usual turmoil of landing. Waiters running 20 ways at once, men tugging trunks, carpet bags, boxes, women anxiously calling to their children, and everybody crowding in a dense mass to the plank towards the landing. Miss Ophelia seated herself resolutely on the lately vanquished trunk, and marshalling all her goods and chattels in fine military order, seemed resolved to defend them to the last. Shall I take your trunk, ma'am? Shall I take your baggage? Let me tend to your baggage, missus. Shan't I carry out these here, missus? Rained down upon her unheeded. She sat with grim determination, upright as a darning needle stuck in a board, holding on her bundle of umbrella and parasols, and replying with a determination that was enough to strike dismay evening into a hackman, wondering to Eva, in each interval, what upon earth her papa could be thinking of. He couldn't have fallen over now, but something must have happened, and just as she had begun to work herself into a real distress, he came up with his usually careless motion, and giving Eva a quarter of the orange he was eating, said, "Well, Cousin Vermont, I suppose you are all ready." "I've been ready, waiting, nearly an hour," said Miss Ophelia. "I began to be really concerned about you." "That's a clever fellow, now," said he. "Well, the carriage is waiting, and the crowd are now off, so that one can walk out in a decent and Christian manner, and not be pushed and shoved. Here," he added to a driver who stood behind him, "take these things." "I'll go and see to his putting them in," said Miss Ophelia. "Oh, pshaw, cousin, what's the use?" said St. Clair. "Well, at any rate, I'll carry this and this and this," said Miss Ophelia, singling out 3 boxes and a small carpet bag. "My dear Miss Vermont, positively you mustn't come the Green Mountains over us that way. You must adopt at least a piece of a Southern principle, and not walk out under all that load. They'll take you for a waiting maid. Give them to this fellow. He'll put them down as if they were eggs. Now." Miss Ophelia looked despairingly as her cousin took all her treasures from her, and rejoiced to find herself once more in the carriage with them in a state of preservation. "Where's Tom?" said Eva. "Oh, he's on the outside, pussy. I'm going to take Tom up to mother for a peace offering, to make up for that drunken fellow that upset the carriage." "Oh, Tom will make a splendid driver, I know," said Eva. "He'll never get drunk." The carriage stopped in front of an ancient mansion, built in that odd mixture of Spanish and French style, of which there are specimens in some parts of New Orleans. It was built in the Moorish fashion, a square building enclosing a courtyard, into which the carriage drove through an arched gateway. The court, in the inside, had evidently been arranged to gratify a picturesque and voluptuous ideality. Wide galleries ran all around the 4 sides, whose Moorish arches, slender pillars, and arabesque ornaments carried the mind back as in a dream to the reign of Oriental romance in Spain. In the middle of the court, a fountain threw high its silvery water, falling in a never-ceasing spray into a marble basin fringed with a deep border of fragrant violets. The water in the fountain, pellucid as crystal, was alive with myriads of gold and silver fishes twinkling and darting through it like so many living jewels. Around the fountain ran a walk, paved with a mosaic of pebbles laid in various fanciful patterns, and this, again, was surrounded by turf, smooth as green velvet, while a carriage drive enclosed the whole. Two large orange trees, now fragrant with blossoms, threw a delicious shade, and ranged in a circle round upon the turf were marble vases of arabesque sculpture, containing the choicest flowering plants of the tropics. Huge pomegranate trees with their glossy leaves and flame-colored flowers, dark-leaved Arabian jessamines with their silvery stars, geraniums, luxuriant roses bending beneath their heavy abundance of flowers, golden jessamines, lemon-scented, verbenum, all united their bloom and fragrance, while here and there a mystic old aloe, with its strange, massive leaves, sat looking like some old enchanter, sing in weird grandeur among the more perishable bloom and fragrance around it. The galleries that surrounded the court were festooned with a curtain of some kind of Moorish stuff and could be drawn down at pleasure to exclude the beams of the sun. On the whole, the appearance of the place was luxurious and romantic. As the carriage drove in, Eva seemed like a bird ready to burst from a cage with the wild eagerness of her delight. "Oh, isn't it beautiful, lovely, my own dear, darling home?" she said to Miss Ophelia. "Isn't it beautiful?" "Tea is a pretty place," said Miss Ophelia as she alighted, "though it looks rather old and heathenish to me." Tom got down from the carriage and looked about with an air of calm, still enjoyment. The Negro, it must be remembered, is an exotic of the most gorgeous and superb countries of the world, and he has, deep in his heart, a passion for all that is splendid, rich, and fanciful, a passion which, rudely indulged by an untrained taste, draws on them the ridicule of the colder and more correct white race. St. Clair, who was in heart a poetical voluptuary, smiled as Miss Ophelia made her remark on his premises, and turning to Tom, who was standing looking round, his beaming black face perfectly radiant with admiration, he said, "Tom, my boy, this seems to suit you." "Yes, masser, it looks about the right thing," said Tom. All this passed in a moment, while trunks were being hustled off, hackmen paid, and while a crowd of all ages and sizes, men, women, and children, came running through the galleries, both above and below, to see masser come in. Foremost among them was a highly dressed young mulatto man, evidently a very distinct personage, attired in the ultra-extreme of the mode, and gracefully waving a scented cambric handkerchief in his hand. This personage had been exerting himself with great alacrity in driving all the flock of domestics to the other end of the veranda. "Back, all of you! I am ashamed of you," he said, in a tone of authority. "Would you intrude on master's domestic relations in the first hour of his return?" All looked abashed at this elegant speech, delivered with quite an air, and stood huddled together at a respectful distance, except two stout porters, who came up and began conveying away the baggage. Owing to Mr. Adolph's systematic arrangements, when St. Clair turned round from paying the hackman, there was nobody in view but Mr. Adolph himself, conspicuous in satin vest, gold guard chain, and white pants, and bowing with inexpressible grace and suavity. "Ah, Adolph, is it you?" said his master, offering his hand to him. "How are you, boy?" While Adolph poured forth, with great fluency, an extemporary speech which he had been preparing with great care for a fortnight before. "Well, well," said St. Clair, passing on, with his usual air of negligent drollery, "that's very well got up, Adolph. See that the baggage is well bestowed. I'll come to the people in a minute." And so saying, he led Miss Ophelia to a large parlor that opened on the veranda. While this had been passing, Eva had flown like a bird through the porch and parlor to a little boudoir opening likewise on the veranda. A tall, dark-eyed, sallow woman half rose from a couch on which she was reclining. "Mamma," said Eva, in a sort of a rapture, throwing herself on her neck and embracing her over and over again. "That'll do. Take care, child. Don't you make my head ache," said the mother, after she had languidly kissed her. "Sunt." Claire came in, embraced his wife in true, orthodox, husbandly fashion, and then presented to her his cousin. Marie lifted her large eyes on her cousin with an air of some curiosity, and received her with languid politeness. A crowd of servants now pressed to the entry door, and among them a middle-aged mulatto woman of very respectable appearance stood foremost in a tremor of expectation and joy at the door. "Oh, there's Mammy," said Eva, as she flew across the room, and throwing herself into her arms, she kissed her repeatedly. This woman did not tell her that she made her head ache, but, on the contrary, she hugged her, and laughed, and cried, till her sanity was a thing to be doubted of, and when released from her, Eva flew from one to another, shaking hands and kissing in a way that Miss Ophelia afterwards declared fairly turned her stomach. "Well," said Miss Ophelia, "you Southern children can do something that I couldn't." "What, now, pray?" said St. Clair. "Well, I want to be kind to everybody, and I wouldn't of anything hurt, but as to kissing, niggers," said St. Clair, "that you're not up to, hey?" "Yes, that's it. How can she?" St. Clair laughed as he went into the passage. "Halloa, here, what's to pay out here? Here, you all, Mammy, Jimmy, Polly, Suky, glad to see Mather," he said, as he went shaking hands from one to another. "Look out for the babies," he added, as he stumbled over a sooty little urchin who was crawling upon all fours. "If I step upon anybody, let em mention it." There was an abundance of laughing and blessing Masser as St. Clair distributed small pieces of change among them. "Come, now, take yourselves off, like good boys and girls," he said, and the whole assemblage, dark and light, disappeared through a door into a large veranda, followed by Eva, who carried a large satchel which she had been filling with apples, nuts, candy, ribbons, laces, and toys of every description. During her whole homeward journey, as St. Clair turned to go back, his eye fell upon Tom, who was standing, uneasily shifting from one foot to the other, while Adolphe stood, negligently leaning against the banisters, examining Tom through an opera glass with an air that would have done credit to any dandy living. "Ha, you puppy," said his master, striking down the opera glass. "Is that the way you treat your company? Seems to me, Dolph," he added, laying his finger on the elegant figured satin vest that Adolphe was sporting, "seems to me that's my vest. Though, master, this vest all stained with wine, of course a gentleman in master's standing never wears a vest like this. I understood I was to take it. It does for a poor nigger fellow like me." And Adolphe tossed his head and passed his fingers through his scented hair with a grace. "So, that's it, is it?" said St. Clair, carelessly. "Well, here I am going to show this Tom to his mistress, and then you take him to the kitchen, and mind you don't put on any of your airs to him. He's worth two such puppas as you." "Master always will have his joke," said Adolphe, laughing. "I'm delighted to see master in such spirits. Here, Tom," said St. Clair, beckoning. Tom entered the room. He looked wistfully on the velvet carpets and the before unimagined splendors of mirrors, pictures, statues, and curtains, and, like the Queen of Sheba before Solomon, there was no more spirit in him. He looked afraid evening to set his feet down. "See here, Marie," said St. Clair to his wife, "I've bought you a coachman at last to order. I tell you, he's a regular hearse for blackness and sobriety, and will drive you like a funeral if you want. Open your eyes, now, and look at him. Now, don't say I never think about you when I'm gone." Marie opened her eyes and fixed them on Tom, without rising. I know he'll get drunk, she said. No, he's warranted a pious and sober article. Well, I hope he may turn out well, said the lady. It's more than I expect, though. Dolph, said St. Clair, show Tom downstairs, and mind yourself, he added. Remember what I told you. Adolph tripped gracefully forward, and Tom, with lumbering tread, went after. He's a perfect behemoth, said Marie. Come, now, Marie, said St. Clair, seating himself on a stool beside her sofa. Be gracious, and say something pretty to a fellow. You've been gone a fortnight beyond the time, said the lady, pouting. Well, you know I wrote you the reason. Such a short, cold letter, said the lady. Dear me, the mail was just going, and it had to be that or nothing. That's just the way, always, said the lady, always something to make your journeys long and letters short. See here, now, he added, drawing an elegant velvet case out of his pocket and opening it. Here's a present I got for you in New York. It was a daguerreotype, clear and soft as an engraving, representing Eva and her father sitting hand in hand. Marie looked at it with a dissatisfied air. What made you sit in such an awkward position? She said. Well, the position may be a matter of opinion, but what do you think of the likeness? If you don't think anything of my opinion in one case, I suppose you wouldn't in another, said the lady, shutting the daguerreotype. Hang the woman, said St. Clair mentally, but aloud he added, Come, now, Marie, what do you think of the likeness? Don't be nonsensical, now. It's very inconsiderate of you, St. Clair, said the lady, to insist on my talking and looking at things. You know I've been lying all day with the sick headache, and there's been such a tumult made ever since you came. I'm half dead. You're subject to the sick headache, ma'am, said Miss Ophelia, suddenly rising from the depths of the large armchair where she had sat quietly, taking an inventory of the furniture and calculating its expense. Yes, I'm a perfect martyr to it, said the lady. Juniper berry tea is good for sick headache, said Miss Ophelia. At least, August, Deacon Abraham Perry's wife, used to say so, and she was a great nurse. I'll have the first juniper berries that get ripe in our garden by the lake brought in for that special purpose, said St. Clair, gravely, pulling the bell as he did so. Meanwhile, cousin, you must be wanting to retire to your apartment and refresh yourself a little after your journey. Dolph, he added, tell Mammy to come here. The decent mulatto woman whom Eva had caressed so rapturously soon entered. She was dressed neatly, with a high red and yellow turban on her head, the recent gift of Eva, and which the child had been arranging on her head. Mammy, said St.